When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 86. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Paul Zimmerman. Today we talk about using lidar and object recognition to find mounds in the American Southeast. Let's get to it. Welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast. Paul, how's it going out there?
Pretty good, Chris. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. So we are not going to waste any time because, we had a pretty exciting article to read and we're going to get right to this. The article that Paul and I both read is called Automated Mound Detection Using LiDAR and Object-Based Image Analysis in Beaufort County, South Carolina. And it was by Dylan Davis, Matthew Sanger, and Carl Lippo. And you can find the reference to that in the show notes for this episode. Go over to arcpodnet.com/archaeotech/86, and you'll find the reference to that article. So we are bringing on to talk about this, Dylan Davis. Dylan, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
Good. So it says you're at the Department of Anthropology. I think all of you are at Binghamton University in Binghamton, New York. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do up there?
So I just finished my master's degree at Binghamton, so I'm actually just starting at Penn State with a PhD program.
Nice.
But my master's work was literally, this particular article was a big bulk of my master's thesis, where I was using this tool called object-based image analysis in conjunction with LiDAR data and other remote sensing data sets to enhance archaeological prospection and the identification of new archaeological features, in this case, shell rings and mounds.
Nice. Well, let's back up because that's a lot in one statement. So let's back up. Let's back up for a second.
That's the synopsis.
What got you interested in this as a master's thesis to begin with? How did you get interested in this? I mean, have you worked in the Southeast, or what brought that up as well as your study location?
Okay, so the location was partly introduced by Dr. Sanger and Dr. Lippo. Dr. Sanger is one of my advisors, and so there was research opportunities with him in South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And as for the topic itself, I also have a background in geography.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a lot of training in GIS and remote sensing analysis to begin with, and I have been coupling that with my anthropological studies.
Okay.
So this particular project helped kind of bleed those two disciplines together, and a lot of my work tends to be multidisciplinary.
Great. I think that's something that a lot of us that get into the tech side of archaeology kind of bring together, a computer or technical interest on one side and then that anthropological. So
absolutely,
it's neat to see what you're doing. Chris and I were both first acquainted with your article from a Heritage Daily, which, is a news aggregator, archaeological news aggregator site that had a synopsis of the article and of the work. And it was really interesting the way that they posed it. I mean, we both came across this article, the synopsis article, that is, independently, and fired off emails to each other. Hey, did you see this? Because it looked like something really right up our alley, in terms of, taking some tools that we know, some GIS tools and LiDAR, and applying them in ways that we hadn't seen used before, to answer some anthropological, archaeological questions. And I'd like to, if you don't mind, I'd like to get into some of the meat of what exactly this object-based image analysis, OBIA, is, and how you are using it. So I don't know if you want to jump in with that.
Sure. Object-based image analysis is basically one way by which we can classify and solidify remote sensing data sets, or really any image-based data. Traditionally, most remote sensing analysts have used something called pixel-based pixel-based analysis. So traditional pixel-based approaches essentially use reflectance data, which basically take individual pixel values. So rather than looking at whole objects, you look at individual pixel data. And so these tend to be more abstract, whereas object-based analysis, you can take specific definable characteristics such as shape, size, overall circularity or asymmetry of different objects, and you can use those to refine what the computer algorithm is going to look for and identify. In a nutshell, you would basically, if you're looking for, let's say, in this case, mounds or rings, you're not going to describe a mound or a ring based on how it reflects pixel values from whatever the sensor was. So you're not going to say, oh, it has a value of 25. But what you might say is this particular object is circular. It's about 50 square meters in area, and it rises from the surface. It has a height of like 3 meters. So that's what you can tell the computer with an object-based approach, whereas in a pixel-based approach, you can't do that.
And were you using off-the-shelf software for this OBIA, or is it stuff that you had to develop yourself?
This is through a software known as eCognition, which is like the industry standard, I guess you could say, for object-based analysis. There are other softwares which are free. So there's different types of things like InterImage or GrassGIS. They all have different components that can do certain levels of object-based analysis. Mm-hmm. Other researchers have created their own code and scripts from scratch. For this particular project, we did not do that, though.
Okay. I'm curious with the pixel-based approach versus the OBIA before we really get into this. Do you have to do this might actually be a question for the end, but either way, do you have to do kind of a combination of the two to first identify overall what you're looking at with the pixel-based approach and then do the object-based image analysis to further kind of refine what the computer is seeing? Or is it just using the OBIA with your method?
So with object-based analysis, you can incorporate pixel values into the analysis itself, and oftentimes that is what happens. So we use the actual pixel values because in this case we were using lidar data, which is elevation values. Mm-hmm. And so those pixel values do come into play quite a bit. So we kind of combine the approaches, but we don't ever really use a purely pixel-based approach. So it's always the pixels grouped into objects, if that makes sense. So an object-based approach, you basically segment an image into different components, and then the pixels within those components can sometimes be used for classificatory purposes. Mm-hmm. So in that respect, we did use pixel-based approaches, but within the context of a larger object.
This sounds very reminiscent, except you're teaching computers to do it and not people, but this sounds very reminiscent of like Galaxy Zoo. Have you ever heard of Galaxy Zoo?
No, actually I haven't.
It was kind of a crowdsourcing thing, and I'm actually not sure if it's still going, but I sort of reference it a lot when I talk about image recognition in archaeology, because there's a lot of things we could do with this, with your research, not just with mounds, but with other types of artifacts if you can get the resolution down, and teach the computer different things. Because Galaxy Zoo basically took images of the deep sky with probably Hubble and some other telescopes. And then, they found that computers couldn't actually tell the shape of galaxies very well. It was difficult for them to do that. So they created this online platform where you could sign up as a user, and it taught you what different shapes of galaxies were, elliptical, circular, I don't know how many different options they had. Taught you what those meant, and then you just flipped through these galaxies and you chose which one. And if, X number of people chose the same thing, then it went to an astronomer for the final check. There's another one, and I think it's called Global Explorer. It was Sarah Parcak who won that TEDx prize and put together this whole Global Explorer thing. She's using a similar approach to find looting across the world on archaeological sites, where she basically shows humans an image that she teaches them what looting looks like first, the computer does, and then shows them an image and says, does this look like there was looting in this image? Because it was really hard to teach computers that. So I guess what I'm wondering with all this is, can you use a similar approach to, I guess, help train the software by first putting in sort of broad parameters, and then take the images or whatever this thing produces, and then have humans look at that and say, yes, this looks cultural, because I noticed several times in the article you mentioned, it's picking up like golf courses and ditches and stuff like that as well, because why wouldn't it? So using humans to kind of knock that out and help refine the algorithm might help. Is that something you guys explored or discussed when you were doing this?
Yeah, and actually part of the way that we finalized the results in the article was through a manual approach. So when we were left with our couple of, I think it was about 5 or 6 or 7,000 results that we had narrowed it down to using these parameters.
Right.
We then went through the rest of those by hand to basically look at, which ones appear to be in the locations that are most likely to be archaeological, and which have the appearance that's most likely going to be an archaeological feature, versus like a golf course or something else. So it's, generally speaking, you'll need a combination of manual and automated approaches, because the computer's never going to get everything, and we're never going to get anything or everything altogether. So you kind of need to combine both aspects to fully explore any given landscape.
Well, I know you guys ground truthed some of your more promising results, and I think I think 3 of them were previously known, and 2 were previously unknown to the field, which is great. And I think ground truthing is, I personally, I think that's where archaeology is going, is we're going to have some sort of automated survey process and, with a little bit of human interaction, and then ground truthing rather than just full scale survey of these areas. Because you also mentioned several times in the article that heavy vegetation in the Southeast in particular makes it really difficult. However, as a CRM archaeologist formerly working in the Southeast, I'll tell you, they don't care. They still send you out there with a machete and a shovel and a screen and say, head on through that heavy vegetation. So one of the questions that I had for you, based on some of this research is, and maybe you're not far enough along in this to be able to tell this, but is there anything that you learned that you might be able to tell field archaeologists that actually are tramping through the brush over there, that there's additional things they might be able to look for aside from obviously a mound feature, but which is surprisingly hard to see when you're tramping through dense vegetation and just trying to make your way through it? Is there anything you guys noticed that maybe are consistent attributes of the vegetation that you can look for that is associated with these features?
Because of how thick the vegetation is when you're down there, it is very difficult to really note anything specific, like, around these types of features you're going to find mounds, or along these types of things. But I think really it would be useful in a sense, like before you send people into the field, if you were to say, okay, well, we've noticed a couple of places that look like they could contain something, really, zero in on that particular spot first. But in terms of like, once we were down there, it's not really very clear, like one spot definitely contains something versus the place directly adjacent to it that has nothing.
Well, your article, returning back to your article goes into a lot of detail about the particular workflow that you use, and a lot of what you discuss in it is relates to templates, right?
Yes.
Templates to help you identify sites, the criteria that the computer programs are using to identify the sites, and then also filters, negative templates, I think you called them, that you're using to weed out false positives. And I thought that was a very interesting part of the article, that how you're using these models in 2 different ways in your methodology in order to try to hone your results. And your final results, when you did go out there and ground proofed them, sounded really promising. I mean, like Chris said earlier, you pretty well nailed it with going out there in the field and comparing what you found in the computer versus what was actually in the real world. Can you explain for our listeners a little bit what you did, what your workflow looked like?
Yeah, absolutely. So it actually combines 2 different types of object-based analysis methods. So the first part of it is basically it's that template matching that you were just describing, and what that basically what you do with a template-based approach is you take basically screenshots of an image. Think of it that way, and you zero in on the exact spots that are mound activity, ring activity, specific features that you're looking for, and you take a bunch of pictures of them and you combine them all together, and you basically create a statistical template. So it's like an average of all of the features that you comprise into this particular image set. And in our case, we had about 30 of them, and we created, I think, 15 different averaged images because there's a lot of variability.
Mm-hmm.
And then it takes those templates and it scans them across every inch of whatever the data set is, in this case, the entirety of Beaufort County. And it looks for matches based on correlation. And so what it actually did is it creates, in eCognition, you can create a new image data set called a correlation map. And it creates an entire map of the study area with respective correlation coefficients to each individual location. And so what you can do with that is you can say, okay, where are matches, 60% likely to be a ring or a mound versus places that are only 10% likely. And by that, you can kind of narrow down places where you're likely to find matches. With the negative template, which we also created, we tested this several times. And when you get the results back, you can look through them. And the ones that we can clearly tell are not rings or archaeological sites that are, roadways or the edges of like rivers and lakes and things like that. We can take all of those and do the same thing. We make a series of templates. But in this case, it's looking specifically for things that are not what you're looking for. And we had I think we had 400 or 500 of these false positives that we compiled into these templates. And what you can do is you make the same type of map, but in this case, it's looking at the correlation for non-mounds. And so in our workflow, what we wound up doing with these templates is once we had our series of results that we were basing it off of, we used the the positive template, which is all the things we were looking for, and the negative template to kind of weed out things that match way too closely to negative matches or that are very high in their association with the true positives. The second thing we did in addition to those template matching pieces is something called segmentation, which is basically a way of dividing an image into into individual pieces based on specific parameters. So in this case, we used parameters including asymmetry, circularity, area, and compactness to basically look at where things match all of these expected values for a mound or a ring. And once we did that, it spit out, thousands and thousands and thousands of results, way too many to go through by hand. But when we cross-referenced it with those template maps that we created earlier, we got rid of anything that matched a negative template result by 70% or greater, because that's almost certainly not going to be an archaeological site. And then we also looked at places where the template for the true templates matched it by 50, 60, 70%, and we kept those in. We got rid of anything that was lower than that. The other thing that we did is after all of the object-based pieces, which would consist of the templates that we just talked about and the segmentation procedure, we also limited results based on land use maps. So anything that fell, on somebody's house or on an area that was, completely ripped up and disturbed and developed and urbanized, all of those we took and got rid of those results also. And at the end of all of this, we wound up with a manageable number that we could actually go through and in the span of like a week or so, go through all the results and figure out which ones we thought were most likely, which we couldn't do before all of that because, you can't go through 50,000 results by hand in a reasonable amount of time.
Right.
Which is the whole point of this exercise. It's not reasonable to do stuff by hand anyway. So, okay. Well, that was a lot. Let's take a break. And when we come back in our second segment, we'll unpack a little of that and we have some additional questions for you. Back in a second.
Okay, you can do this.
I know. Carvana makes it so convenient to sell your car. It's just hard to let go. My car and I have been through so much together.
But look, you already have a great offer from Carvana. That was fast.
Well, I know my license plate and VIN by heart, and those questions were easy.
You're almost there. Now to just accept the offer and schedule a pickup or drop-off.
How'd you do it? How are you so strong in letting go of your car?
Well, I already made up my mind, and Carvana's so easy.
Yeah, true. And sold.
Go to Carvana.com to sell your car the convenient way.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Welcome back to the Architect Podcast, episode 86, and we are talking to Dylan Davis about object-based image analysis. So, Dylan, before we go too much further, maybe we should take a step back, because I don't think we did this, and that's define lidar, because that was, one of the primary things you guys used for your research to really give you all these data. So, now that we have an understanding a little bit about what you were doing, I think now is actually a good time to try to define lidar a little bit and where you guys got your lidar data from. So could you do that for us?
Sure. So lidar is it's either considered light and radar or light detection and ranging, and it's basically radar but with light. Mm-hmm. So what it does is it shoots beams of light towards the ground's surface, generally from like an airplane or some kind of aerial platform. And it records the return speeds and times for those light pulses. Mm-hmm. And by doing that, you can map the topography of regions, and you can even do that in places that are, covered in a lot of trees and other vegetation, and you can get surface maps. And so the data that we used was collected by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So it was government contracted lidar surveys that were done to monitor environmental variables along the coast. Mm-hmm. And so it's freely available, which is the nice thing, because otherwise lidar is incredibly expensive to purchase. Yeah. And it also came in resolutions that were high enough. This was, I think, 1.2 meter resolution lidar. So it's high enough to do archaeological surveys with, because sometimes the lidar is just too coarse of resolution to really see individual objects. So the coarseness of the resolution, if it's less than a meter or greater than a meter rather, it's generally more difficult to identify individual objects. Whereas when you have the resolution that we did, it's much more manageable, especially for things like mounds or ring or settlement-sized features.
So the features that you're recording here, if your resolution is about 1.5 meters, how big were the features that you were looking for?
So typical rings and mounds, specifically rings we'll talk about. In South Carolina, they tend to be about 50, 60 meters across at minimum, and some of them are much larger. Mm-hmm. So we were looking for anything that was, somewhere between 15 square meters and 150 square meters in area, which this has the resolution to identify. And actually, a lot of what we did find was much smaller, which was interesting, because generally speaking, you miss the smaller stuff and you find the larger stuff.
How small of a site could you find with this system?
With this, generally speaking, you're not going to find things that are a meter, because if it's 1 meter resolution, each pixel represents a meter on the ground. Mm-hmm. So realistically, you could probably find something with sufficient detail that's about 8 to 10 meters across.
And did you augment this lidar data set with any of your own lidar data collection?
We processed the lidar into elevation models, which are done using interpolation algorithms and other things. Some of it was done by NOAA, and other things were done on our end with like ArcGIS. We also created like slope maps from the elevation model, and we also calculated elevation differences to figure out where the greatest elevation change was taking place. And we also used a visualization technique called topographic openness, which basically looks for anywhere that there's, slopes on the surface. So it's looking specifically for like rises and sinks, which is perfect if you're looking for mounds.
Yeah, typically. So I'm wondering, would, with the prevalence of drones and their lowering in cost yearly, mm-hmm. and drone-mounted lidar, I know is a thing. So would that even matter, or did you find out that with the freely available government data and getting, a better resolution than you expected to get. If somebody wanted to continue this survey across the Southeast and in other counties in South Carolina and around the whole, the whole Southwest and into the Midwest, would they have the similar success, do you think, or would it benefit them to have their own aircraft or drone-mounted lidar at a higher resolution, or is this good enough?
I think that for the purposes of replicating exactly what we did just in other counties to get a general sense of overall what types of features are we finding, I think that this is probably good enough.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to then go back and do more detailed analysis of each feature you're finding, you will almost certainly need drones or some higher resolution data set because it is very pixelated once you get down to it. It can identify it, but then when you're actually looking at it really zoomed up, it's very coarse.
Mm-hmm.
So for a site-by-site analysis, you definitely want much higher resolution, sub-meter, couple of centimeter resolution data sets to really work with. But for broad landscape stuff like this, I think that the freely available stuff is definitely good enough.
Okay. Excellent. Another question actually about data applicability is I presume that the area that you were working in was fairly flat. It's coastal and low-lying areas. Would the same sort of techniques work in hilly areas or craggy or sloped? Or does it need a fairly flat plane to work as using the particular tools that you were using?
So to use the exact same procedure we did, it could present some challenges with more rugged terrain. There were some areas of our study area that were definitely a little bit more hilly and less flat, but overall, it is definitely more flat. Basically, each region that you apply these types of methods in, you need to account for the exact environments you're working with and the exact features you're looking for. And so there can't ever really be a one-size-fit-all type of approach. It always needs to be regionally specific. And so if you take into account the unevenness or the very flat nature of the topography, you can kind of work in whatever those exceptions are, and you can apply similar methods to this, but you'll need some additional variables and potentially to modify some of the data sets you're working with to make them more usable with the method you're applying. So depending on where you're working, if there's tons of vegetation and so the data set is a little bit more chunky, it may not be as accurate as a much higher resolution area with much flatter topography overall, but it can still be used. You just have to kind of work on and manipulate the data a little bit more to make it more usable with the methods that we're applying. But it can certainly be used in all sorts of areas.
Good.
I've got a question about the data that you ended up with as a result of all this. It says in the article here, of course, that supplemental data for the article can be accessed at the website over at Taylor and Francis, actually, where this was published. And I'm wondering about the what kind of data is actually over there or are actually over there. Is it, if somebody were to go check out that data or those data, would they be able to find the locations of potential locations of all the mounds using your software that you guys? Okay, that's what I was asking because that seems like pretty sensitive information.
Yeah, so the supplemental data set that's on Taylor and Francis's website is a list essentially of all the mounds that we identified that were pre-identified. So all it contains is essentially the number that we had and then the site number that's actually been assigned to it.
Okay.
There's no geographical information. There's no coordinates. And then there's additional supplemental data that we had, which was the templates themselves. That also does not contain any geographic data or information. So the coordinates and the locations of these particular sites are not publicized anywhere.
I guess a potential issue, though, is somebody could, in fact, use the publicly available data and replicate your methods and just find stuff, right?
That is one possibility. If they had the time and the resources, that can definitely happen. And that's potentially one of the issues with freely available data. But at the same time, it does still allow, I think, a lot more good than potential bad. But there are certainly risks associated with what type of data is freely available to the public.
Looking at the good of all this, of course, is your data available to, and I mean actual locations of things that you guys found, but weren't able to ground truth, obviously, because you found so much. Would that be available to agencies or CRM firms if they were to ask for that, or are you guys locking that down, but allowing them the methods?
As far as I'm concerned, if an archaeologist or an archaeological firm wanted access to the locational information, I would be willing to provide that, but it would certainly be, it's more locked than it is open. Like we would want to make sure whoever's actually using it is qualified and so forth. But yes, It would ultimately be for sharing, because we want people to actually go out and look and confirm as many of these as we can, and so we can continue to improve the method if it need be.
Yeah, it seems like working with the state and, at least, I don't know if they're aware of what you did or not, but at least making them aware and saying, hey, we have this huge data set. And if you get anybody requesting a permit or, work authorization to work in those areas, that maybe they could ground truth some stuff for us and let us know what they found. So that'd be pretty cool. Yeah, because there's tons of CRM projects going on in those areas pretty much all the time. So, with the high amount of development that happens in that area. Yeah. Paul, did you have something?
Yeah, you said good, and I just because my jaw dropped when I read this. From the conclusion of the article, I'm just going to quote here: "Despite these limitations, our algorithm enabled us to identify topographic features for an entire county of 2,481 square kilometers in the span of 1 week." Which is, Chris and I are very into using computers to help archaeology to speed up data collection, to improve data processing and analysis, and to make the methods more clear and reproducible. And when I see something like this, of being able to scan an entire area once you've developed the system of this size in this amount of time, it really it seems like a huge boon for the field.
Absolutely.
So I don't even know where I want to go with that, other than just to say that number, 2,000, almost 2,500 square kilometers in 1 week. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Now, you do mention, again, back to the notion of the templates. You do mention that you can use those, that you can refine them as you go forward, right? You could improve your positive templates. You can improve your negative templates. I suppose you can probably incorporate other kinds of data from other scanners to improve them. You can ground proof and use that to further improve. And that's something else I like, is that this is potentially a very iterative process where you and other researchers can continue to apply the techniques and modify them and improve the model.
Absolutely.
As you go forward. That's also very exciting to me. Do you yourself have any plans on continuing with this particular project, or now that you're moving on to a PhD program, are you moving to something different?
Well, for my PhD work, I'm sure it will involve some similar things and some different things. But with this particular project, we are continuing. We're basically building analysis off of what we found, so we're not currently expanding it to new counties, but that will certainly be the future work that we continue. But in the meantime, we're actually looking at the shell ring features that we identified and trying to get a better understanding of settlement distributions and overall patterns that we're seeing with that in combination with the data we already had. So looking at what we knew about before versus what we now know, and kind of seeing if this tells us anything new. That's the project we're kind of working on now. And future work will also, I'm sure, expand the use of this method to the neighboring counties along the coast.
So you're going to continue your studies in the Southeast?
Most likely I will be doing at least some of my work in the Southeast, yes.
Nice. Cool. I'm pretty excited about this because, like Paul said, that quote about the 2,481 square kilometers in the span of a week. I mean, I talk about this a lot on the podcast, but I did a 30,000 acre survey, which I looked up is about 121 square kilometers, so a tiny fraction of what you did, and it took us 8 months to do that survey. So,
wow.
Yeah. So, and it was in the Mojave Desert, in Southern California, so a little different. But I'm
not too many shells.
I know it's like everything. You start big with mounds and stuff when you're trying to see these with those kind of data, And then we can come all the way down eventually, I think, when we figure it out and we get the resolution on the imagery. It's really, you're figuring out the software side of it, which I think is amazing and great, and really working out the algorithm. And once we can feed the algorithm, sub-centimeter resolution data, which we would need to find individual artifacts and things like that on a desert surface, well, then we're done. You're doing the math, and we just pump the data into that, and we should be able to knock that survey right down. I love it. What I'm curious, when I look at the title for this article and also your master's thesis, I'm curious, were you interested in mounds and mound detection first, or were you interested in lidar and object-based image analysis first, and we're trying to find a place to apply that? What came first?
The remote sensing side of it, so the lidar and the OBIA aspect probably came first, I would say, and then it was finding a place to apply it, and this was one very, very useful place to apply it that it hadn't been before. So in North America in general, this technique has really only been applied maybe a handful of times before, and the Southeast was not one of those places. Nice.
So in your search for a place to apply this technology, what didn't make the cut? What were some of the other things you were thinking of?
There were a couple of other places. Mostly the other location I was looking at for doing research was actually in Polynesia, but the data available to us based on funding was not there, whereas we had the freely available data sets, and it just made a lot more sense in terms of financially to apply it here first to see if it works, and then later on we can apply it when we know it works. We can purchase additional imagery. Nice.
I've been told that there's a lot of free imagery available, like really high resolution LiDAR data of the Lake Tahoe Basin. I live in Reno, Nevada, and there's no mounds here, so I'm trying to figure out what we could use it for. But there's a lot of dense forest cover and things like that, and sometimes old structures and things are found from miners and settlers back in the 1800s.
Yeah, it could definitely be used for historical archaeological survey.
Absolutely. So, okay. Well, what are your next steps? I know you kind of already answered that, but where are you going from here?
So I'm continuing to do some of this work with the settlement distributions with the rings and stuff we found from this project. And I'm also just starting out for my PhD, so looking at a couple of different potential things, but nothing is solidified yet, all up in the air.
Okay. Well, Dylan, I think that's all we have for you today. Certainly feel free to come back if you
develop any other great new technique.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We'd love to have a follow-up if you learn anything new about this or find somebody using it or like Paul said, develop some new stuff that we can talk about. So we're always happy to talk about tech on the Archaeotech podcast. And we have a lot of listeners that might be able to chime in as well. If you come across something and you want to maybe crowdsource some ideas about it, come on and talk about it, and we'll put it out to the listeners.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Dylan.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we will be back shortly for our App of the Day segment. Back in a minute. Hey, podcast fans and digital archaeologists. Have you heard about WildNote? It's a data collection app that works online or offline on your smartphone or tablet, iOS or Android. It allows you to collect field data easily, manage data efficiently, and generate data reports and site records effortlessly. We have a growing list of state site forms built in for your use and some generic forms that will work anywhere. Check out the shovel testing and photograph forms. You can get a free all-access 30-day trial today by going to wildnoteapp.com. That's wildnoteapp.com for your free 30-day trial. Tired of the webinars and training offered by the big organizations not being free for members and not really covering what we need? Team Black has the answers. Check out arccert.black/main for our upcoming webinar schedule. All of our webinars happen once a month and seating is limited. Learn everything from field tech basics to drones to digital workflows. We have more classes coming online every month. Classes are always 1 hour and cost just $20. Classes like building a CV and getting a job are always free. That's right. We'll help you get a job, then we'll be here when you want to level up your skills. If you are a professional subscriber to the APN at arcpodnet.com/members, then you get all of Team Black's offerings for free as part of your membership. We have Team Black memberships coming that will give the same for the APN. So $20 a month gets you all the APN swag and extras, plus free training from Team Black. So check out arccert.black for more information and level up your skill set today. That's arccert.black. Now back to the show. Welcome back to the Archaeotech Podcast, and this is the App of the Day segment for episode 86. And I'm going to go first, and mine is not an app at all. However, it might help you with some of your apps. I don't know. But I recently became aware of dual USB drives. Maybe I'm completely backwards on this, and everybody else knows what the hell I'm talking about. But just in case you don't, some of the early dual USB drives had the standard USB plug you're looking at, so USB 2.0, 3.0, 1.0, presumably, that standard USB flash drive that you're used to seeing.
The big flat rectangular one?
Exactly. So, and then on the other end, it would have like a micro USB, which is similar to the power and connection requirements for, say, most Android phones and other devices like cameras and all kinds of stuff use that micro USB plug. So you could presumably take that micro, plug it into your Android device, tablet, phone, or camera, or whatever, transfer files to it, and then plug the other end into your computer when you're done and not have to worry about any weird connection issues, and then transfer the files. Well, when I edit my podcasts, I use audio plugins to do some of the editing from a company called Waves. And Waves is uber strict on their licensing. So if you have one license for your audio plugins, which I do, you have to either use their Waves Central program on your computer to send that license to the cloud and then pull that license back down to another computer, because I'm constantly going back and forth between the iMac in my office and my MacBook Pro at home or wherever else I'm working. And when I first started using these Wave plugins, my God, the amount of times I would forget to transfer that license back to the cloud before I left the office. And now I've got my computer at home and I'm editing podcasts. Like, son of a bitch. So I'd have to wait until I got in the next day and then fix it that way and fix the audio after I edited it. So one thing I did do that they allow you to do is you can actually put that license on a USB flash drive. So I took a flash drive. Now I keep that in my backpack, and I always have that license with me. But again, I have another small problem, and I understand these are first world problems. However, it's still annoying to me. My other problem is my iMac has the standard flat rectangular USB slots on it because it's about a 5-year-old or 4-year-old iMac, whatever it is. But my laptop is, and I think I bought this it's about a year old. It's the new MacBook Pro from 2017. So it has 4 USB-C slots. So in order to plug in the regular flash drive, I have to do one of two things: either get the infamous dongle from Apple or somebody else and plug that in, and then plug the USB drive into that, which I have one of those, but it usually stays here in the podcast studio. But the other thing I bought was this USB hub that basically plugs into one of the ports on the USB-C thing, and it gives me 2 regular USB 3.0 ports. It gives me a micro SD card slot, a regular SD card slot, and then a through port for the USB, so I can plug my power into there or something like that if I wanted to. And that's how I have to plug in my flash drive. Well, I went on Amazon literally this morning and said, I'm done with this. There's got to be something to fix this. So I said, I just typed in USB-C dual, not knowing that anything like that existed. And sure enough, there's an entire market for that. So I spent like $25 on a 64 gigabyte flash drive that's got flat rectangular USB 3.0 on one end, USB Type-C on the other end. So now I'll be able to use the same USB flash drive without any extra dongles, without any extra hardware. I'm a huge fan of carrying as few things as possible. And I'll be able to plug that in my iMac in my office. And then when I go home or to a coffee shop, wherever I'm going to work for the evening, I can then plug that into my MacBook Pro. So I thought I'd bring that up, even though a lot of people probably don't have USB-C ports on their computers, because I know it's a solidly Mac thing right now, and it's only Macs, the MacBook Pro made in the last 2 years, I think it is. That being said, a lot of newer Android-based phones don't have micro USB anymore. They have USB-C. A friend of mine had, I think it was a Galaxy, one of the newer Galaxy phones from Samsung, and it had USB-C on the bottom. So if you're interested in transferring data that way and not using by pulling out your micro SD card, then it might actually help you. And I know a lot of archaeologists have Android phones, and I would highly recommend, if you want to transfer data off quickly or store a whole bunch of stuff on a drive that you're always carrying with you, because you can get these really small ones that are 256 gigabytes in size, and they're only about $60, $70 for that size, but super cheap for the 64 and like 128s. You can get them for $30-$40. And use that to just either store or transfer data off your devices. This might also be good for digital archaeology. If you have Android devices out there and you want to pull information off of those and store them, you can just pull it off using one side of that drive. And when you get back to the office or back to the vehicle, wherever the laptop is or computer that you're using, plug the other end right into your computer and transfer all your data that way. So pretty handy little device. And I thought I would let people know about that in case they are as ignorant as I am and had no idea they even existed. And I'm excited for mine to get here tomorrow. Thanks, Amazon Prime. So that's all I have. I'll put a link to the one I purchased in the show notes so you can see it, but there's tons of options out there.
Right.
All right.
Okay.
Paul, have you ever heard of anything like that?
Only I've had this kind of ongoing project since the spring, a programming project kind of scratching the back of my head with a Raspberry Pi. And eventually I wanted to go from a regular Raspberry Pi to a Raspberry Pi Zero, which is a little kind of credit card sized one. And the Raspberry Pi Zero, one of the features of the programming project is going to be logging data out to an external source, to a USB drive. And the Raspberry Pi Zero only has the micro USB. So I could either have a dongle on that, or I could use a micro USB USB drive. And as I was looking for that, I found out that there are combo ones that do micro USB and the full size USB on the same device. So that's one less dongle. That's one thing. I haven't actually purchased one because I don't have a Raspberry Pi Zero, and I've kind of hit a snag with my programming project, so I'm not to that point yet. But it is something that I ran into a couple months ago. I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Nice. All right, cool. Well, what have you got for us today?
All right. So I like to talk about apps that I've had on my phone for a long time and use regularly, even if it's not used frequently, but use, once a year for that one specific thing. Today, I'm going to talk about something. This is kind of going to be the anti-app of the day. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a rant. A few weeks ago, I went to a concert with my daughter and my niece. We went to go see the Arctic Monkeys at Forest Hill Stadium. Pretty good concert. I'd purchased the tickets back in the spring when they first went on sale. How it is when you buy tickets online now, you pay the however much, the $50, and then you pay the other $50 of convenience fees and taxes and inconvenience fees and whatever else. So I go through all that, and they tell me that when the tickets become available, they'll send me a link. Okay, fine. So the concert gets closer, I get the email, I get the link, and I download it. And unlike what you're probably used to, where you get a PDF that has your ticket, you print out and you take that, or a link that'll take you to the website and you can load it up, say, into your Apple Wallet, which I've done before and I like quite a bit. This was a link to go to a website that has a product called Flash Seats. And if you look, I didn't look at what the reviews are like for this on the Google Play Store. It's both Android and iOS. But on the Apple Store, the reviews are brutal. And it basically does what it's supposed to do, which is that it downloads your tickets onto a scannable barcode on your phone. The problem is that the companies that use this particular service, Flash Seats, you don't have an option of getting a ticket in any other form. You have to download this program. You have to set up an account and give away additional personal information that you probably don't want to do.
Right.
In order to use this one app to see your tickets. You can't pass the tickets once you've gotten them over to say your Apple Wallet. They just exist within this one program. And I have no idea what this is supposed to help anybody for. Really, I've already spent too much on the tickets. I've already spent all that money on the convenience fees. And now I have to download an app, set up an account, give away some personal information in order to get access to the ticket that I've already paid for because they provide no other way about it. It's a really, in my opinion, it was a really cynical way of getting some sort of demographic data and some sort of lock-in to use this one particular product. And the reason why I bring this up on this isn't, if you have to use it, you have to use it. I mean, you're screwed. If you're going to Forest Hill Stadium to go see a concert, you're going to have to use this. And actually, that's one of the complaints on the Apple reviews. A lot of people said, I went to go see a particular sporting event. I'm not going to go see that team again when they're playing at home because I don't want to have to use this app. There are some horror stories in the reviews about customer support with it. I'm not surprised. Everything about it feels very fly by night. Mm-hmm. But I bring it up in the context of the Architect podcast, especially after the interview that we just did, where, there's a new technique that potentially can be used to really cut short the amount of time that it takes to survey an area. So it's using new technologies in an innovative way in order to improve speed and accuracy of what we're trying to do. This particular program, this Flash Seats, is the opposite. It's using new technology in order to not really benefit the consumer, in order to put up needless walls. There are plenty of ways to get your tickets. Everybody else seems to have figured it out, but for some reason, this company has their own way of doing it that's incompatible with everything else. And I don't know what somebody would do if they don't actually have a smartphone. I mean, there are still people out there with flip phones.
Right.
I have no idea how they're going to get access to their tickets when they go to that venue because it's not there. I mean, presumably they'd go to the box office and talk to somebody and they'd look it up and blah, blah, blah. But that's just a whole lot of extra hassle. Again, I bring it up in the context of this podcast because sometimes when we do things with tech, it seems really smart when we start. It seems like a really cool idea. And as we dig in, we might find that, we're reinventing the wheel. Oh, we're spending so much time programming it that we're not actually saving time in the end. That it's maybe a dead end, a false start. And I just want everybody that listens to us that does their own programming to just be aware that sometimes you just have to, pull the plug on whatever it is that you're working on. Somebody else has done it better, and just stop.
Nice.
So there's my slight rant, negative review of Flash Seats.
Okay, then. It's good to get stuff like this because, archaeologists are traveling around a lot and might want to see a show or something where they're going, and this could be one of the options that they have for the tickets. So it's good to have your unbiased review of this software. I like it, good or bad, so we can know. Okay, well, tell us about your favorite apps. Tell us about what you thought of the show today, and what do you think more importantly, what do you think the technology that was discussed in the beginning here, what do you think it could be used for? I know I've got my brain flooding with ideas for what they could use that for, and where it could go in the future. And I think, like I said, I think they nailed it, or they are nailing it. They've got the workflow solid. They proved that the workflow is good. Now we just need to give it better data and we could pretty much do anything. I mean, that seems like a logical conclusion. The workflow is good, give it better data, and we can find anything we want. Like Paul was saying too, with this Flash Seats thing, sometimes there's good intentions and they don't work out too well. So I think we have to be careful. I'm skeptical of him even publishing the workflow for this, because like I mentioned, if the data set he used was freely available, and he published the workflow, then literally anybody can replicate those results. And, having the computing time and the time, that's not really an argument against, should you do that, because people will find the time, people will find the computing ability if they want to, if they think there's a price for it. And with all these unexplored mounds out there and the sheer dollar value in the artifacts on the open market for that kind of stuff, the money and time is there. So be careful when you're publishing that kind of stuff, I would say.
Yeah, I would say, though, in his defense, he's not publishing those templates.
That's true.
He explains that they do build them, and he explains some of the parameters that they use to build them. But the templates, as far as I can tell, are not being published. So the data set, that lidar data set that the state put, or that NOAA put together, that's available. but the smarts behind it aren't necessarily.
Right, indeed. Okay, well, thanks, Paul, and I'm glad the lightning and storm passed you by and didn't knock out the podcast.
Yeah, me too. It's it's always good when we don't get hit by lightning.
That's right. So I will put a request out for this. We are looking for, just because we have a few extra minutes here, we are looking for volunteers to do various things with the APN. So if you have a couple extra hours and you want to help with this really good public outreach tool that we've built here, I'm hoping that the volunteer efforts of the volunteers and our efforts do lead to monetary compensation as well, some mildly paid positions, because we need volunteer effort to really get some of our stuff that we want to do off the ground. So if you're interested in that, send me an email, chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. There's a ton of different things, so I don't want to just go into it on this podcast, but just to say that we're looking at all kinds of different stuff that you may or may not have a skill set for. What I really need is people to have time, just a couple hours a week, and we could teach you what needs to be done. It's really just getting it done that is the problem. So none of this is hard. It's just the doing of it all. So, and as compensation, if you make it through at least a month, and we can commit to about 6 months on a really loose contract, just to say that you'll do this for about 6 months. After your first month, I'll give you a 1-year pro membership in the APN and send you the whole swag package. So I know it's not money. It's not compensation from a pay standpoint, but it does have about a $400 value when you look at it that way. So, or $350 value, whatever the case may be. So anyway, contact us if you're interested in that. What do you think, Paul? Sound good?
Sounds great.
There you go. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Archaeotech Podcast. Links to items mentioned on the show are in the show notes at www.arcpodnet.com/archaeotech. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com and paul@lugal.com. Support the show by becoming a member at arcpodnet.com/members. The music is a song called Off-Road and is license free from Apple. Thanks for listening.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.